again, we have one of the biggest fund managers and the oldest fund managers in Tanzania. But again, most importantly, um, I always bet on myself the most, right? So I think that's the biggest thing at the end of the day, being able to bet on yourself. In the UK, it's different. You have 16-year-olds that work in proper jobs, legit, and they're making like decent money. And it shows you like, okay, maybe the biggest thing is actually great and hard work and going all in, right? Yeah, we don't all have to make payment apps, right? Like, yeah, we don't all have to make payments apps, especially from, I know payments and fintech is still a huge issue in Africa, but like, if you ask me, there's still a lot more apps that can be built.
Before we get into today's episode, a quick one. If you are new here, welcome to Builders Block. If you have been here, thank you for staying with me. This podcast is for builders who want to learn directly from founders, builders, entrepreneurs in the African Web3 ecosystem, all about their journeys, the ups and downs, and what actually works. While you are here, I want you to do just two things to help move this forward. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on conversations that will actually improve the quality of your mind. Now, that's the only thing I will need from you to keep bringing high quality guests to the podcast. Secondly, I'd love you to drop a comment. Your thoughts might just inspire somebody out there watching this also. Thank you so much, David, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Ayo. Seen the great work. Pleasure's mine.
Thank you so much. Our guest today is building nTZS, Tanzania's first fully compliant stablecoin, backed one-on-one with Tanzanian shillings, and is also building Nedapay, the stablecoin payment platform built for the world's freelancers, merchants, and businesses. It's great to have you here. Now, one of the things we do at Builders Block is to understand the human side of the builder. You're doing amazing work, you're building great products, but we really want to understand the context to who you are, right? How you grew up, your background story. Are you the firstborn or like the last born? Such context, right? Over to you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. So where do I start? So I was born in Botswana, um, but both my parents are Tanzania. I was fully raised here in Tanzania. So I firsthand seen like challenges of the average person growing up in Tanzania, right? I'm the last born of two. But I have a very, very loving family and supporting family as well. Um, I was fortunate enough to get a bit of exposure, I'd say. So I studied in the UK for university, where I did my bachelor's in international business and French. And then I was also fortunate enough to get a scholarship to study my master's in innovation management in Wuhan, China. And that's pretty much where I bumped into all these new technologies like big data, AI, and most importantly, blockchain. Right. From there, I came back to Tanzania, started working in banking. Um, about 2 years. That was agents banking. And for those that are not aware, agency banking is pretty much um, dealing with those guys that are really the most banked, right? So it's guys that's gonna call you at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, ask you how to use their mobile bank app or ask where the money is at, even though it's in the mobile app, right? So yeah, that was great experience there. From there, I thought it was time to now do my own thing. Started diving deep into the Web3 space, and I was super fascinated about how money could literally move in seconds rather than waiting days and delays for banks, right? So been building there. I was fortunate enough to also meet some incredible people in the Web3 space as well. And most importantly, I'm a huge football fan and I'm a Chelsea fan. Although my team's not doing well right now, but hopefully we'll rise from the ruins.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much for that. Now I want to go into like the early days, right, of like your background, right? You mentioned you were fortunate to go study in the UK and then later on China, right? But can you walk us through like some of like your favorite childhood memory in growing up?
Yeah, one of the best memories, I could say, I think one of the best memories is actually landing in Tanzania when I was a kid, honestly. It felt like home because I haven't been home for long. Um, and it was my first time in Tanzania when I was a kid, right? So I think that's the biggest childhood memory. And even just the reception and the people and just seeing how things were just alive, even as a kid, right? Because you don't notice too many things as a kid, but you can notice the or feel that frequency. And I think that's the biggest memory coming back to Tanzania as a kid, right? Like grew up playing with kids and friends around my neighborhood, but like the biggest thing for me, I think it was the moment I touched down. Like,
Interesting. Now, I'm curious about like the experience of having to travel between two worlds, right? To the UK and also to China. Can you walk us through like what are some experience that you had or some lessons that you learned that sort of like shaped your worldview as to what is obtainable?
yeah. So I think with the UK, um, there wasn't really too much different. Like the systems are pretty much similar, right? You have mobile banking apps, you have your bank app. Most people use, at least they used their bank apps back then, right? So it was straightforward. Um, Challenges, of course, were still sending money from home. You still have to wait 3 days, face multiple FX hops, right? So there was the blocker there, right? But the biggest eye opener, I would say, was when I went to China, right? And I've seen how payments was just super smooth there, and everything was just super coordinated. And when you really think of it, I think Tanzania is closer to a country like China than it is to a country like the US or the UK, because we're such a sovereign country, right? Like trying to protect everything, trying to preserve currency, culture, and like, right? So I was kind of shocked where like anywhere, everywhere you go, they literally pay for everything on like WeChat, Alipay, and everything's like super free, right? And coming back home, everything is like you have to pay a fee on everything, right? And over there, you'd see the average street vendor, you'd see even an average beggar, right? God forbid for even saying that, but they'd have a QR code where you can even tip them or pay digitally, right? And you come back home and you face these challenges, and a lot of people are trying to onboard guys to this digital economy, right? And it's funny because in a country like Tanzania, we have like over 60 million plus mobile money wallets, and that's the first entry to the digital economy in Tanzania because your M-Pesa is pretty much your wallet as well, right? And you get that when you get a SIM card, right? But it still carries a lot of inefficiency in terms of like cost. You can't move cross border, you know, and there's no programmability there. But in China, it was more different. I mean, it's locked. You can only use it within China, but everything was just super smooth, super efficient. And I thought this level of programmability and interoperability is something that's definite, right? There wasn't much interoperability then, and that's pretty much right around when I bumped into stablecoins, the whole idea of stablecoins. And that's actually what made me actually dive more deep into this whole field. But I have to say, China was the place that I was like, okay, payments can actually be lot more smooth, right? Talk about stablecoins and how they're cool and they can move around, but like, I think China actually perfected the whole um, smooth payments space, especially from an African point of view or from like a Tanzanian point.
Right. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I can deduce from what you said is exposure, right? Because you were exposed to like different worlds, sort of like connected how you think about the world and the type of problem that you want to solve for. Experiencing like fast payment at the point sort of like changed, or like cross-border payment sort of like changed how you think about the world. Now, I'm curious as to like, by any chance, while growing up, what did you want to become, right? Because probably exposure changed it while growing up. You know, you mentioned you went to the UK to study, and then you went to China to study, and then later went back to like agency banking when you came back to like Tanzania. Can you walk us through like what did you want to become early on, and did exposure by any chance change that?
Yeah, of course. So funny thing is, growing up, I used to be okay. I'm still a huge music fan, right? I used to think like I'm gonna be the biggest rapper, and that changed to like football. I thought I could be a professional footballer, especially in the UK, right? But the level you come to realize that the level is this high, right? But yeah, I think even the life experiences, the exposures, they shaped me into like even like my route today. Even in the UK, for instance, I was fortunate enough to work in areas where they're pretty much aligned with my passion, I'd say. So, for instance, I was working at Arsenal Football Club, the UK, And me being a huge football fan showed that passion there, and even that day-to-day drive where like, okay, it might not be what you do every day, but if you're in the same field, um, you can still feel that whole sense of fulfillment. If that makes sense, right? Again, met incredible people there. One thing led to another, but again, the situation in the UK is a lot different to the situation back home, right? The jobs you might want aren't really necessarily the ones that are available, and there's always that whole issue of like knowing someone, and I think it's such an African problem, right? Uh, but yeah, I think every experience pretty much shaped me to where we are today, even in terms of like coming back here, working at bank, the people I met there, the experiences I got there. I think it all led to actually what we're building here today, even in terms of like stablecoin and how we're trying to complement the existing financial uh, system from Tanzania, but from a global point of view.
Right. So exposure did like sort of like change your um perspective to life, especially like what to do or like what you want to become over time.
And
Um,
how you
really,
work, right?
sorry.
Because and how hard you have to work, right? Because for instance, in the UK, you
Mm,
see as young as 16 that's working and that's living like a proper life, right? And in most African countries, you're not working at 16, right? If you're a builder, you might be building at 16, especially these days. But like back then, you wasn't really working at 16. But in the UK, it's different. You have 16-year-olds that work in proper jobs, legit, and they're making like decent money, and it shows you like, okay, maybe the biggest thing is actually great and hard work and going all in, right?
yeah, right. And and you sort of like took that into like your next adventure with that exposure. Like you, if you put enough hard work into something, you're gonna be great at it, right? And so, what made you transition into like agent banking, right? When you came back, was it like you saw like a need, or it was like an opportunity?
I think it was pretty much a mixture of both, and I think it's God's timing, right? Because I could have been in any department in banking, but like I was more of a digital guy, right? So um, the department itself is digital financial services, but the sub department is agency banking, right? So um, I think it gave me a lot of exposure, even in terms of like how digital payments technically work, right? Even in terms of like settlements between banks and mobile money, um, cross-border transactions, the challenges there, and even meeting some users as well, right? So to see the challenges there, and some of our first initial users for Nedapay were pretty much the same guys that were facing challenges at the bank, right? And even today, we started working with some banks in Tanzania, and like even the bank I was working on is one of the banks we're also working on today, right? So we're also rolling out, for instance, now transactions to countries like China, countries like the UAE, and we're looking to also roll through these volumes from these banks as well, because currently they charge crazy fees, like ridiculous fees, and we're offering a very very um, feasible solution.
Yeah, right. What experience did that system teach you? Like having to work in that, or what lessons did you learn from like that system, the traditional system of like the financial world, how things actually work? Were you able to pick up some lessons working in that, setting?
Yeah, of course. First thing is some people don't really worry about things like time and fees, right? They just worry about making sure the money arrives there safely and in a way that they know best, right? So let's say people use banks every day, right? Like there's a big chance for a country like Tanzania people to not move from what they know every day, like banks, right? Even though um they might charge high fees, they might charge like invisible fees or invisible bank charges and the like, right? But it's something that they know. And for countries like Tanzania and most African countries, they're very, very conservative. So I quickly realized that even if I was going to build, I'd rather build on top of what's already existing, right? And another thing I learned was pretty much things don't always go um, your way, right? Because the customers never wrong, right? So customer might call you at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., they're complaining, even if they're clearly wrong, but they're never wrong, right? So there's that whole element of, there's that whole human element an aspect where like knowing how to talk to people, knowing how to deal with people, um, having that tolerance as well, because that's another thing, right? People are going to shout at you, and you have to be tolerant enough to actually um, be responsive in a proper way, right? And that kind of humility goes a long way in terms of like even dealing with customers on your day-to-day businesses, right? So um, that whole people relationship was a huge thing I also learned there, because you deal with different types of people. You're gonna deal with the mama mboga, for instance, in streets. You're gonna deal with the merchant from Kariakoo East that's trying to pay supplies in China, but you're also gonna deal with like a super high net worth client as well, who's trying to send money to their kids in the US who's studying, right? So having those relationships always goes a long way, and they've put very helpful, at least for us at Nedapay and nTZS as well.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really interesting, like lessons that you've learned, and I'm sure like you also take that in what you're building now at Nedapay and nTZS, right? What were some things that I'm sure like it was because you got exposure into like blockchain and you saw how fast it was? Because you mentioned that some people don't really care about time and speed. They just want because they are locked in into like the existing system. In as much as my money gets delivered, I'm fine. But like, at what point did you decide you wanted to leave and move into crypto?
Yeah. Um, so pretty much around the same time, like I bumped into the concept of stablecoins, right? And I could send money cross border with stablecoins, and then I was telling my boss at the bank at that time, like, hey, these customers are complaining about their funds arriving 2 3 days later. The charges are crazy. We can use this thing called stablecoins. We can have this reserve that um, just hold in USDC. Um, in terms of like if you ever want to make cross-border transactions and settle with that, because all these banks are always in need of dollars, right? They're always looking for dollars. There's always dollar shortages in Tanzania, in Africa as a whole, right? And the guy was like, "Yeah, man, you're super smart, and regardless of how young you are, you can have your department and do your own thing and everything." So me being me, I was patient, but it wasn't really happening. It was all just like political, right? And I felt like, okay, maybe it's time, rather than sell dreams to these guys, I'd rather as well just do it myself and show them like, hey, this is the actual solution, right? And that was the moment I said like, okay, it's time to pretty much go all in. They offered me a new contract, but I was like, I think it's time to actually do my own thing. Um, and yeah, that was that. I feel like it was the best decision, honestly, because regardless, I still got like great experience working there, great network, and it really shaped into what we're building today. Without that experience, it wouldn't be what it is today, right? And I always tell a lot of people, like even before building, it's always great to like have some experience in that field, right? Whether it's like finance or whether it's like engineering or whatever, but having some experience and knowing exactly how the ins and outs work always goes a long way.
All right. I think I'm particularly interested in one part, right, which is like knowing when to leave and what made you muster that courage? Because quite a number of persons might also like see that future, but they don't have the courage to sort of like leave, and probably the fear of uncertainty, because leaving like a stable job at the time to go start your own thing feels like uncertain. What was the act for you, for somebody who wants to take that same step?
Yeah, I would say just go all in. I don't think if you can go 50-50 if you want to do something or make a decision like quitting your job and going all in your business, right? Um, there's always that whole life balance where you always gotta pay your rent, you need some money to survive. But I think even with that, it gets to a point where you have to take that jump and take that risk where, hey, I feel like now it's time to go all in, right? And once you make the decision, you can't really look back, because it's not really a startup journey's life, right? Like you can't really do or afford like that type of skepticism or thinking twice, right? Like you always have to be assertive. You always have to be certain in what you're doing, and most importantly, have a lot of clarity in terms of the direction, right? It's never always going to be figured out, but like I think once you're in the right position at the right time, it always goes a long way. And being in the right position at the right time means a lot of things, right? Like knowing the right people, um, even going as the small things as even logging in on X at the right time, seeing the right content from the right person, right? So yeah, a lot of things are like chance and timing, but again, it's always like what you expose yourself to, what you read. So yeah, I'd say just go all in and don't get back once.
Right. Thank you so much for that. So for someone watching this right now, maybe this is your cue to like go all in. No like halfway there. And you have to build on clarity, right? Just like David mentioned, you have to go with full clarity and also, be consistent. Time and chance would happen, but like you have to keep showing up, right? Yeah, talking about like business and the product that you're building. Can you walk us through what is Nedapay, right? And the second question to tie to it is how does nTZS fit into like your bigger vision, right?
Yeah, so Nedapay went from being just a front-facing app to more of like building infrastructure. Right? So we're building our infrastructure for global payments, connecting banks and mobile money to different rails, right? Through stablecoins. So they can send money globally to pretty much almost any country in the world, but with like stablecoins in the backend engine. And we have APIs for that ready as well. Uh, uh, we are looking to build an engine of non-USD stablecoins specifically, right? And that really led us to nTZS. So in Nedapay, we support a bunch of non-USD stablecoins. I think around 5, 7, right? That includes like CNGN, South African stablecoin, and now most importantly, Tanzanian stablecoin alongside the traditional USD stablecoins, right? And the goal is to have this seamless experience for users to send money and transact globally without having to worry about slippage, price impact, or multiple FX swaps and fees, right? So the biggest challenge before was on ramping um, into the US dollar if you want to send money, right? But now with nTZS, that means people just send what they're familiar with and you can keep everything in the back end, right? So what happens is they just deposit from the bank or mobile money, and once they receive their nTZS, they can move it around, right? So they can pay supplies in China, they pay supplies in Dubai, and move it anywhere pretty much without any price impact, right? So we have a market making system as well, where any liquidity provider can come in and provide liquidity on either side or both sides and earn from the spreads. So they set the rate, they set the bids and the asks, how much they're affording to go over or below, and earn the fees from there. Right? So we're also working with institutional investors, institutional LPs who also come in and provide liquidity to facilitate this trade. But of course, liquidity is always a constraint, right? So we're always looking for and looking to source as much liquidity as possible to facilitate the trades, right? Because China is a huge, huge market for Africa, let alone Tanzania.
That's bold. Bringing Tanzania on chain is a lot, right? That means that a normal Amamboga can now come on chain, sending Tanzania shilling and then converting that into nTZS, and then they can plug into like the global financial, landscape. And NEDAPay is like the front end that sort of like makes this possible. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And we're also offering yield, right? So
Hmm,
even though Mamboga can get up to 10% yield on like
interesting.
whatever funds they receive or hold, right? And that's a
Hmm,
huge, huge issue because previously, like not a lot of people were used to like investing or like buying into these funds with like a significant amount, right? But we're pretty much democratizing it and making it like easy for not only the Mamboga to get in on chain and get yield, but like even anyone in the US, UK, to also buy into these funds and also generate the yield as well. Because, for instance, the US they get what up to like 5, 6%, and over here we get up to 14, 15%, and the inflation rate's been pretty stable. I think it's around 3% for the past couple of years, so it's pretty predictable. right? Yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing. And Nedapay is definitely the front-facing app for all this to happen: transactions, swaps, payment links. But we also have a main app for nTZS as well, where people can go there and mint and redeem directly.
Oh, nice. And so doing all of like this great stuff, I'm sure like you must have been in talks with like a lot of institutions, a lot of regulators, a lot of banks, players. What has been like the biggest lesson so far working hand in hand like with these institutions and being like the first of its kind, building like the first of its kind local stablecoins for like Tanzania? How is that experience like for you? And what has been like the biggest lesson so far?
Yeah, the biggest experience I'd say is abstract everything, right? Like avoid as much jargon as possible, right? You might find people who actually understand the technical side, but like the more you abstract it, the more you make it easy to understand for the average person, the better, I would say, right? And the biggest lesson I would have to say is everything is like pretty much better than you think, right? Like we have a fund manager, for instance, and they were looking for ways to get on chain, but like they didn't know how, right? So they were talking to guys that's looking to tokenize gold, but they wasn't really sure how to actually do it, right? And that led us to now understanding like, hey, um, for a country like Tanzania, you can't just build a stablecoin and then, right? You need to build a whole infrastructure for it, right? You need to be able to get away where that Mamba Boga can get on chain without having to worry about like private keys, but you also have to be like big on privacy as well and big on like self custody as well. So it's like a bit of a balance, right? We also needed to build that whole infrastructure to connect mobile money to banks and enable that pipeline for our fund managers as well, to also have like that ability to pretty much like invest the funds as well, right? So that whole infrastructure, the whole regulatory inside dashboard, that whole um, um, compliance aspect as well for attestation and everything. Like we realized that okay, this is something that we also need to like build and that right. So that was the biggest lesson. So that led us to even having this infrastructure now, where even now our fund manager wants to now build their own app, which is like a one-stop investment shop on top of the nTZS infrastructure, right? So now, and they have like millions and millions of users in Tanzania. So this is like a distribution game where like, okay, you can now get all these millions of users on chain easily without even having to know or worry that they're coming on chain, right? So that whole abstraction there is what we're looking to achieve as much as possible. And the end goal is to definitely plug it into um, like an M-Pesa or like a Airtel Money type thing, right? Because we have Tanzania interpayment system here, which basically offers close to zero fees to these banks and PSPs, right? But at the moment, there's still like a certain percent where people have to on off ramp there, right? So that causes a bit of inefficiency for now. But imagine if the central bank would give us like 0%, right, for on off ramps. That means like everyone is getting on chain and everyone can pay for utility bills without having to worry or having to worry about crazy fees, right? So um, still in talks with the government. It's always a conversation back and forth. But they're very supportive and it's a step-by-step process, right? So hopefully we're gonna get there not too distant future, and the work's only just getting started.
Yes, right. The work is only just getting started. From what you said, right, some questions came to mind, right? You mentioned your fund manager is building like an application where like people can sort of like invest, right? If I'm correct. Now, the question is, what are some use cases that you have seen to have emerged so far with building nTZS, right? Is it just only payment, or what are like some amazing features that your ecosystem builders are building on top of nTZS? Do you want to mention, and what does like the next 5 years look like?
Yeah, of course. So there've been some very interesting use cases so far. Building on top of nTZS already. Um, right off the top of my head, from what I've seen so far, I've seen guys building prediction markets locally, right, where they can predict local outcomes. I've seen guys building content monetization platform where creators can monetize their content and sell them for the fee they set there. I've also seen a house renting app. I've also seen someone most recently building, but not even building, integrating our wallets as a service for their drivers here in Tanzania, right? So they're like a logistics company, and they want to pay their drivers and the guys who make deliveries, right? So they integrate nTZS and using those wallets, right? So it's pretty much they load up to their master wallet some nTZS, and whenever they want to pay them, they just distribute these wallets, right? So that's another interesting use case I've seen. Another use case I've also seen, which also like leads to also liquidity issue I mentioned earlier, is like arbitrage, right? We've seen some guys like Chinese that are kind of afraid of like currency devaluation. So what they would do is look to swap to a USDT, USDC at the end of the day, and in the morning they get back to Tanzanian shillings for operations as well, right? So that's another use case we've been seeing. And what they normally do is like around 100K USD, that type of volume, right? So that's the whole liquidity aspect, right? Those are the volumes that people need on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's why we had to even get like institutional investors, institutional liquidity providers to come in and say, hey, this is the kind of volume that these guys are looking for, and this is how much you can earn from spreads, and this is how everything pretty much works, right?
Yeah, really, really amazing use case. So you guys are building like an ecosystem of, builders, from like prediction market to like content monetization to like house rentals, and also like yields, payments. Really, really amazing work you guys are doing. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently by any chance? Whether building nTZS, Nedapay, or like your journey as a maybe.
Yeah, I think again I'm gonna go back to the abstraction part, right? I think now we're focusing on a way where like even my mama can use Nedapay and send money to China, right? And in the beginning, was trying to sound too technical, I'd say, and have a lot of jargon like gas fees, like stable coins, or that. But like the average person, at least in Tanzania, isn't really worried about all that. They just want to see the most minimalistic way they can send that money to China, or they can pay for something, right? They see value in minimal things rather than like a lot of jargon, right? So that's the one thing that we've always been doubling down, and we had to learn fast that hey, abstract as much as possible. So even right now, what we're really, really focusing on is trying to abstract NEDAPay as much as possible, so users can easily understand, right? And that's one thing. If I could change, I would say I would have abstracted it from the beginning as much as possible. If possible, not even tell them or even using blockchain or anything.
Yeah, right. I think that's pretty much amazing because you want to be able to onboard, as we have been saying, like a local person, probably like an hamburger who doesn't even know about the blockchain, but wants to do or perform a transaction. He or she doesn't need to know whether it's on Base or whether it's on Sui or Solana or any of those things, right? You just do whatever thing you want to do. Really, really interesting, right? Now you've taken like quite a number of like asymmetric bets, right? From coming back to Tanzania. I'm sure like most of your friends would have asked you like, you're in China, right? Why come back to Tanzania, right? Having finished like your studies, why didn't you continue working there? And also like leaving your job, right? What does this mean to you? Like taking bets. How do you measure like a bet that is worth taking, basically? Because I've seen you do that while even talking right now from like your journey. How do you measure a bet that is worth taking for anyone listening out there?
Obviously, the returns need to outweigh the current situation, right? That's the biggest thing that I always look at immediately. But again, most importantly, um, I always bet on myself the most, right? So I think that's the biggest thing at the end of the day, being able to bet on yourself. right? Like the asymmetric risks is nice and everything, but like knowing that this could actually work out might not be today, but tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and being committed to that goal, I think that's the biggest thing, right? So I'll go back to our example for building nTZS. We've been engaging with the central bank for time now, right? Like I think since we started putting in our application, I think it's been 2 years almost, right? And we recently just got accepted to the Sandbox, right? And this is because not they don't know what they're doing, but again, like they are very sovereign country, they're trying to preserve their currency and like fully understand what's going on, right? So, um, biggest thing is we stayed committed to the cause, and here we are today, right? So I think for anyone there, the biggest thing would be pretty much seeing the positive obviously outweigh what's currently in play, but again, most importantly, definitely betting on yourself. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, betting on yourself and understanding that the return outweighs like the risk at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's to heart, right? And for anyone listening here, right? What has been like some major key milestone, building nTZS and also Nedapay? You mentioned you guys just got, will I say like clearance from the CBN, right? That's one milestone. Congratulations on that. What are some other key milestones that you sort of like want to share?
Yeah. So again, we have one of the biggest fund managers and the oldest fund managers in the world. I mean, not in the world, in Tanzania, right? With TSL. So it was pretty big securing that, even in terms of like regulation and in terms of like just giving that confidence to the central bank that hey, okay, these guys maybe they know what they're doing, right? Um, Another thing would have to be partner with banks as well to do their volumes, right? So that would be another huge milestone that we actually managed to achieve with Nedapay and still building towards like plugging into as many banks as possible in Tanzania, right? So like I mentioned earlier, we're looking to build on top of what people are already doing and what they're already using rather than completely revamp that as well, right? So we currently work with two banks, um, but we're looking to add more and more banks on board because those are the same banks that we're also onboarding to nTZS as well, right? Uh, yeah, and I think now we're almost doing close to 500K per quarter for Nedapay. So that's great volumes as well, and we're always looking to go there, right? So I think those are the biggest milestones I would say. But the next milestone we're looking to kill is this liquidity issue, right? Because people are looking to do like at least 100K, 200K USD per day to places like China. Right.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Really, really amazing milestones, and congratulations on all of them. I'm also rooting for you on like the next milestone. On the flip side, right? What were like some, or like walk us through like the diary of challenges that you had to navigate, because getting the CBN to like validate what you are doing is sort of like a tough one, right? Walk us through like the challenges. I know you mentioned one. I think liquidity also, or if you want to like specify or like shed more light on that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say mostly. I wouldn't look at it as a challenge, right? But I would say the time aspect, right? Like uh, the central bank of Tanzania was taking a bit of time to respond, especially from like our initial application. Like I said, like it's been like almost 2 years since we started applying, and we recently just got it, right? So I'd say that was the biggest blocker. Like we could have moved a lot faster if we got the approval a lot earlier. But again, it doesn't mean like it was a blocker, right? Like it just gives more confidence because um, I remember even back then when we just started, even when approaching banks and PSPs, the first thing they're going to ask is, are you regulated? Right. So if we had that approval from the central bank, it would have saved us a lot of energy and probably got us a lot more users and customers a lot earlier. But yeah, everything I look at it as a learning curve and as an opportunity, right? Rather than really as a blocker or like a challenge. Yes.
All right. So you see challenge as like an opportunity. Interesting. Awesome, awesome. Now, all of this, right, makes you sort of like an entrepreneur, right? Um, Building businesses, building solutions, and all of that. What does being a techpreneur means, or what does it mean, and what would you say to your younger self, or to like a young person looking forward to be a techpreneur also?
Yeah, I'd say a techpreneur definitely needs to use a bit of AI these days, right? Um, yeah. So whatever tech you're building or whatever enterprise that you're running, it needs to have a bit of like technicalities to it, right? And by tech, I would say not even in the most jargon way, because these days almost everyone is a techpreneur, right? Like as long as your business is making money and it's using any kind of tech, it doesn't have to be blockchain, it doesn't have to be AI. It could literally be just a simple application where people pay for goods and services, or like a simple website, but it's making money, then you are automatically a techpreneur in my eyes. I feel like words like techpreneur these days are a bit overrated and overused, or maybe like anyone is just becoming a techpreneur these days, right? But in my eyes, I think um, if you are having any essence of tech, it could literally be a website, but if it's making you money and it's your source of income, source of truth, I think you're a techpreneur for sure, because you made something out of nothing using the power of technology. And technology includes things like internet, like payments. It could be fiat payments, but it's still fiat payments, right? We never used to have mobile money payments before. So that's technology as well, right? But as long as it's always looking to improve on the tech aspect and let's say use newer technologies, then that's a techpreneur for sure in my eyes.
Right. And so, what would you advise a 10-year-old or like a 15-year-old who is looking to become a techpreneur? What would you advise? You mentioned like AI, right? What other things would you advise them to do?
Go out there, meet a lot of people. Even AI doesn't really solve the problems, right? Like you need to understand the problems. Uh, I seen like a recent post. I think some guy in the US, some US kid, they raised like a bunch of money to build like an Africa super app. And I was like, okay, that's crazy. They probably haven't even been to Africa, right? Um, but they're in the US, right? So you can't really compare situations. But for anyone else, I would have to say definitely get out there, meet the people, meet the users who would be using your product, understand their pain points. And even after building the product, you still have to talk to these users and understand the pain points and what's working and what's not working. Right? So even as a 15-year-old, I'd say expose yourself to as much as possible. Um, and that includes reading as many books as possible, reading as many articles as possible, and even what you watch, right? Like I watch tokenized podcasts. I listen to tokenized podcasts every morning when I wake up, and you'll be shocked on the amount of things I learn every day, right? So you're always learning, and the more you learn from a younger age, the better if you ask.
Yeah, right. Let's step out of work a bit, right? You've mentioned music, you've mentioned like football, right? Um, Earlier on, you wanted to be like the biggest rapper, in the country, right?
The world.
Do you used to pursue music as a side quest or like a means of stepping out of work to like recharge and all of those things? Basically, how do you recharge? How do you unwind from like the stress of crypto or work, basically?
Um, I play football still. Fortunately, I'm a very good footballer. Um, but yeah, I don't go to the studio as much as possible these days. But like it always sparks up my creativity, right? So even in the work I do, even if it's like just listening to music or writing lyrics or writing lines, like it sparks up my creativity and thinking, right? And that pretty much sparks up my way of thinking as well in the business that I run every day. In terms of like how to talk to customers, how sharp your thinking is, strategy, and biz dev overall, right? So for me, the creativity part is what really sparks up my day-to-day operations in business.
So basically, it's more of the challenge while playing football, sort of like builds like a muscle memory to solving other tasks also. And when you do more of that, it sort of like helps you when you are doing sort of like your day-to-day at work. Interesting. And so would you say like for any like builder in Web3, you should have like an outside skill or like interest or like hobby? So in your case, it's football, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Football, whether it's watching, whether it's playing, and
Mm,
music as well. I'll say music for sure.
nice. So this question is more personal, right? I want you to think about it. What are some money investment that you've made so far that has changed your life? And what are some money failures that you've made so far that you regret it today?
That have changed my life. I'd have to say buying a PC, buying a new PC. Like I remember I used to have a PC, but it was like a blocker, right? Like rather than a helper. And 99% of the work I do is on the PC, right? So like I needed to get a new PC, and that money 100x my productivity. Uh, Same thing I'd have to say for paying for cloud, right? Like 100x my productivity for sure. Um, Money that I've spent that felt like a throwaway is probably when I used to be trading, right? Um, and like I wouldn't advise this to people, but that's just non-financial advice. But like I wouldn't advise retail trading, especially like trading forex to people. But yeah, that feels like money that I just threw away if you ask.
I mean, I want to laugh so hard, but yeah, I think I feel the same. But anyways, it's by the side or like all gone now. In any case, that's really, really interesting. I think there's like this image online of like you only need a PC. And you mentioning like that point that the biggest money investment you made was like buying yourself a PC. I think it sort of like resonated with me also, right? Because getting a PC basically also like changed my life, right? I started from like using a Dell laptop, and then it was sort of like shitty. A friend of mine had to buy like battery, and yeah, I mean after some back and forth, I had to change to like Mac and so on and so forth. And it has been like great so far. Learning to code, meeting people, doing great work. Yeah, I think that's a really big eye opener. Now that I'm even thinking about it, I think yes, I agree with you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Right. Also, like before we sort of like bring the podcast to sort of like a close, these are like personal questions that I sort of like want to dig into. Right. What are some relationships that have had the most impact in your life? Also, we talked about money investment. We talk about like money failure. Now let's talk about like the biggest relationship that has made the most impact in your life.
That's a tricky question. Um, uh, I'd have to say maybe my co-founder, right? Because I've known him for a while, and we've done like multiple ventures together. So like I think that relationship there has been very very supportive and very productive as well. Even in terms of like being where we are today, right? So even on the off days when I'm not around, he's around. If he's not around, I'm always there, right? So I think that type of relationship is pretty much the most impactful. I'd have to say, just thinking off the top of my mind right now, right?
Yeah, I think I do agree with you. And now we sort of like have to talk about that. How did you and your co-founder meet? You mentioned it's been like a very long time coming, right? I really don't know how many years now, but walk us through like how you guys met. Was it at a party, or was it, at a wedding, or was it, in school, that type of thing, and how you guys sort of like connected the dots to start building.
Yeah. So it was through music, right? So he's a producer, I was an artist, and we met at the studio, pretty much, right? For making songs, we realized that we have passion for like social capital and enhancement. So yeah, we've just been building solutions to improve social capital ever since, and that led us to Nedapay, that led us to nTZS, because prior to that, we actually had a music streaming application that actually had like 10,000 users, but it was a scaling issue, right? But yeah, I think it's great synergy. We work great together, and Yeah, it's pretty much through music. That's how we met.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Most persons would mention how that they met their co-founder at like a party or like a wedding and so on and so forth. But like you guys met at like a previous venture that you were into. Like you mentioned you're a music person, right? And now you guys were able to grow together, you know, build products together, so on and so forth. What skill do each of you bring to the table, and how do you guys complement each other? That's the first question. The second question would be, anyone looking to get like a co-founder, what should they look out for?
Yeah, he's very technical, right? So he's I'm technical too, but he's very technical. He's more of like the one who's leading the tech side. So I'd have to say definitely he brings a lot of that to the table. Um, in terms of what I would look for in a co-founder, I'd say someone who doesn't do what you do, right? So if you're a developer, then you should be looking for a marketer, right? If you're a marketer, then you should be looking for a developer who can actually execute what you have in an idea, right? Another thing you have to say is values, right? So you also gotta align and share the same values, right? Because values go a long way towards showing authenticity of a person, and if that person is going to be faithful in your endeavors in the future, right? So um, for values and morals is also a long way, and another good way. I always measure these things as well. So for anyone who's looking for a co-founder, I'd say those are the biggest things to actually look into.
So before we sort of like bring the podcast to an end, what's one thing you want to say to the audience that you've not said before, right?
Uh, yeah, I would just say hold nTZS, use nTZS, get yield from nTZS, and I believe every country should have a non-USD or a digital representation of it on chain. It just makes easier trade, smoother trade, um, less FX hops, and we don't really have to settle in USD, even if I'm settling in Kenya, right? So if there's anyone there who's looking to issue these USD, these non-USD stablecoins, I highly encourage them to do so, especially if you're in Africa, because trade in Africa is huge. Intra-Africa trade is huge, and global trade is obviously huge and bigger, right? I think a lot of countries in Africa trade with China, right? So yeah, the more the most feasible ways we can get on chain and smoothing trade, the better, if you ask me. So yeah, if there's more issues there, I highly encourage. So this guys who's looking to issue, I highly encourage. But again, it's not an easy job, and there's always regulation that comes with it. There's always capital liquidity that comes with it as well, and obviously, most importantly, a lot of uncertainty. Right. So um, that's all I'd have to say.
Yeah, that's really, really unique, right? You've heard it all from David, right? If you're looking to like issue non-USD stablecoin, you should, and also, use nTZS, old nTZS, and also any yield on nTZS, right? And so I've come to like the end of the podcast. Now we move to like break the block. If you had abundant capital today, which African startup would you invest in and why?
Um, I invest in Block Radar, and specifically because I know the founder, because I know how hardworking and talented the guy is, um, and also the need for infrastructure in Africa, right? Like I still feel like infrastructure is like 1% built in Africa, right? So we can't really build proper products if there is no infrastructure, right? So definitely Block Radar for sure, and Paycrest too, I'd say.
Yeah, I think Block Radar and Quickcrest has always been like top choice for most of the founders that I've spoken to on the pod. Yeah, really, really great product that they're building and solution that they're, you know, building and problem they're solving for. Right. The second one is, what's one belief about building in Africa that you think is completely wrong? And sort of like, other than payment, what niche do you think people should be building in? Like, what other niche do you think has caught your attention in the past month or past quarter that you think people should be building in?
I think climate tech and sustainability is an angle that a lot of people aren't really looking at. Um, but I think it's definitely an angle of value, especially even on the infrastructure side, like verification tools, impact tools. I think that's also another huge angle.
Oh, nice. And so, what's one concept about Africa that you think it's completely wrong, or like building in Africa that you think is completely wrong?
Um, yeah, we don't all have to make payment apps, right? Like, yeah, we don't all have to make payments apps, especially from I know payments and fintech is still a huge issue in Africa, but like if you ask me, there's still a lot more apps that can be built um, and monetized as well, right? So there's that. But again, one thing about Africa, I'd say, is there's a lot of talent, and we're seeing that with guys like me from Tanzania, and and it's spread out, right? Like I remember, and I'm sure a lot of people pretty much just think talent is condensed in countries like Nigeria and Kenya only, but like there's so much talent that's scattered like all over Africa. You can't really know until you actually get to meet those people, right? Because I've met some really very talented people that's not from Nigeria or Kenya, and not even Tanzania, right? Like countries you wouldn't even expect. But it's just like I think it's that exposure and like getting access to this and that visibility is what's been missing. But yeah, that's one thing I'd say that's definitely misconceived about Africa.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, David, for like sharing your journey with me today and joining me on the podcast. You shared, quite a number of like amazing insights, building nTZS and also Nedapay. And congratulations on all the milestones, right? And also rooting for you on the next milestone that you guys have set, right? So if this conversation made you curious about what David and the team are building, be sure to follow him on X and check out nTZS, old nTZS, yield on nTZS, and also check out Nedapay. And if you found this conversation valuable, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel for more conversations as this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode.